frame the pole, hold the antenna with one hand so you don't risk dropping it.
One of the best experiences you can have is to go out in the field and collect data.
My opinion has always been collect all of your data in metric.
So there's a difference between the data collection and the data delivery.
That's really a great benefit that all of you have is access to that equipment for research.
I've seen some surveyors that like this whole point, it's not pointed anymore. It's just like a nub. And I was like, what do you still call that 2 meters? And it's like, yeah. I was like, it's not.
Who's excited to be here? You guys look sleepy. Come on, wake up, wake up. This is the funnest day of your grad experience now. It's all gonna be fun. It's all uphill from here. So thank you all for coming out. It's exciting to have some new faces here as well as some of the current students here and others as well. So before we jump too much into the workshop and kind of what we're doing here today, let's go around and do some introductions so everybody has a chance to know each other, because I think this is kind of one of the key objectives of the workshop, is to give everybody a chance to start getting to know one another. So why don't we start with you, Chris? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and if you want to share your most embarrassing moment, you're welcome to do that too.
Most embarrassing moment. There are so many, it's hard to pick. Hi everyone, I'm Chris Parrish. I'm a faculty member here in Geomatics. This term I'm teaching our undergrad surveying theory course, also teach photogrammetry, kinematic positioning and navigation, hydrographic surveying sometimes. My background, I've been here for a long time now. I used to feel new. Now I've been here for, I think this is my 11th year. Before this, I did a number of things, but worked primarily at NOAA and most of my time for the National Geodetic Survey, doing everything from field surveys, GNSS, and differential leveling to airborne LiDAR surveys and photogrammetry. Just great to see you all. Welcome back for those who are continuing, and welcome to the new folks.
Hi everybody, I'm Brian Weaver. I'm an assistant research professor here at OSU. Started here actually on that side of the room like 10 years ago, and ended up in the UK for a PhD and came back to OSU to start work after that. My background is on GNSS algorithm development, so high precision applications. I've also dabbled in some other things like satellite radar altimetry and control surveys and everything that you'll go through in the program here. Nice to meet everybody that's new.
I don't know if it's going this way.
Whichever, whoever speaks up first,
Yeah.
we'll roll with it.
Hi, my name's Baird. I think I'm on the wrong side of the room, but I'm a master's student working with Chris on some drone-based bathymetric LiDAR, and Mark Raleigh over in COS on some snow modeling.
You should be in like the center aisle. Kind of that transition zone.
There's no right or wrong side.
I'm Mike. I'm not sure why, but I'm here today. So I'm a professor in geomatics. I've been here a decade and a half plus a little bit. We'll leave it at that. So a while, but great place to be. I teach courses in laser scanning with Ezra this fall, digital terrain modeling, point cloud programming, and then an undergraduate introduction to Python course that has a geospatial theme.
Sanjay.
Oh, Sanjay, yeah, that's right. Yes, he's snuck in. It was a strategy.
Hi, my name is Sanjay, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student here, and I did my master's from Florida Atlantic University, and my undergrad is from Nepal, and I'm working with Mike and Chris Parrish on NSRS modernization and converting the legacy GNSS dataset to the new NSRS modernization.
Awesome. Well, nobody shared their most embarrassing story. I'll save mine for later today. It'll actually happen today, I'm sure, right? So. All right, so we've got an action-packed day for you today. Just wanted to kind of set expectations of what the purpose of this workshop is, so everybody's on the same page. Our goal here is to train you so you're familiar with kind of some of the policies and procedures and things that we're doing in the lab. We've tried really hard over the year to kind of standardize the way we do things, because as we've grown in students, so in 2009 when I started here, we had no master's students, no PhD students. It's been a couple decades since that program has started, right? Now, I won't venture the exact number, but somewhere on the order of about 25 to 30 is kind of about how many grad students we have, plus, you know, several undergraduates and others working here, right? So we've grown an infinite amount in that short time, right? So it's really important that we kind of get on the same page as far as things of using the equipment, because otherwise you may be needing the equipment for your research and thinking it's available, and somebody else took it out, and lo and behold, they're down in the Bahamas collecting field data, which may or may not be a true story. So we want you to kind of be familiar with how that process goes, get everybody on the same page, as well as we're kind of in the process of setting some policies. So this is a chance to kind of give some input with that. We also want you to understand the basics of how the equipment operates. So this afternoon you have a module where you get to go out and work with a piece of equipment, kind of see the workflows and the processes that we're doing in our lab. So you get familiar with it, as well as basic care. It's very important we take really good care of this instrumentation that we have. So there are some units that we directly own at Oregon State that we purchased. There's other units that are on loan from Leica Geosystems. The other part is to get you thinking about how to do some of the field work. It's usually you have a pretty compressed time to do the field work. We want to make sure that you're doing things meticulously, that you're paying close attention and doing the work correctly, not taking shortcuts, but also being efficient, right? So there's a kind of a balance that comes in that process. So, you know, you can't be spending too long to do it, or you don't get all the data that you need, and that part suffers. But at the same time, if you get sloppy setting up a control target, you're going to be spending a whole ton in processing trying to figure out what happened. You know, there are lots of different surveys where we're wondering, did somebody forget to lock in the prism? There's a 1 centimeter offset. We think that's what it is, but who knows, you know, what really the case was. So we want to really kind of talk through those things that are really important to make sure we just do some simple checks in the field that can save you a lot of time later on. And then of course, the other chance is to meet others in the geomatics area and get familiar with one another. So I put this slide in here just because there's a few of us here today, but there's also a lot of other geomatics faculty that you can leverage. We'll kind of share this with you after, so you can kind of get the different information, but there's a lot of resources and a lot of people here at OSU to help. This is just within civil engineering. We also have a couple geomatics faculty that are located in forestry, and then there's a lot of geospatial faculty in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences, agriculture, other areas. So geospatial is a big part of the campus here, and so there's a lot of opportunities beyond, you know, kind of what you see here in civil engineering. This just kind of summarizes kind of some of the parts of the graduate student experience and other things, or undergraduate researcher that we try to get you involved with. There's all sorts of different aspects to geomatics, ranging from the sensor integration, putting the components together, designing your own drone system, to the acquisition, collecting the data, to the processing, different ways to do it. As Ezra mentioned, kind of a lot of his focus of his research here was to develop efficient algorithms to do it, and then into modeling and analysis. And students will focus on different areas here. So during your course of your graduate experience, you're not going to be able to focus on everything in a ton of detail. But we want you to get exposure across all these different areas while you're here, and then you can kind of pick some areas to focus in on. Today in the boot camp, we're mostly focusing on the acquisition part. And then we're going to have a series of seminars through the fall where we talk through some of the processing, so you see that. So that's kind of the parts we're gonna focus on, because we can't cover everything. We've got a lot of really great lab space. So many of you have already been over to the research lab. Just talking with some faculty yesterday, we have kind of an annual faculty meeting, and they're pretty jealous of what we have in terms of space. Put simply, they're like, how'd you guys do that? How'd you get that together? We want something like that for our grad students. It's a really nice space that you have to work in. You know, it may not seem like a lot sometimes to say, hey, I've got a desk, but the university space is a premium. And so if we aren't using this space and people are walking by, which they do, they're going to say, hey, this space is underutilized. We're going to start moving in this group, or we're going to start doing these other things, and we're going to lose that access to that space. So it's important to use it, keep it clean, take good care of it, and work with it. So you'll spend some time over there today as well as looking at the prototyping stations and the equipment storeroom. We also have the VR room over there, which is where we're gonna have lunch today, and we're gonna do some equipment staging in that area. And then we're also in the process of building a new teaching lab over in Carnegie Hall. Those of you taking laser scanning will be in the lab. At the start of the quarter, it's not gonna be fully ready. It's gonna be up to 30 computers, really nice computers for basically reality capture software and so on. So that's in progress. So that pictures of the old room. But just kind of some quick things with lab space expectations. It's a shared space, and so you need to be very respectful of one another in that space, right? This really helps everybody be on the same page. There, I can't tell you how many times it comes up. Somebody's in the process of getting ready to go in the field. They checked everything, and then all of a sudden, some of the things they need are not in the spot that they're supposed to be, right? Or they forgot something and they need to come back and they're in a rush and can't find it. So the more we do our part to do that, the better. Lastly, be vigilant. Corvallis overall is a very safe place. We don't have a lot of issues with break-in or other things compared to a lot of other places there, but at the same time, we don't want to make it easy for people, right? So let's keep the doors shut and locked. As you walk by the lab, make sure the doors are shut and locked, particularly the door to the outside. So that door to the outside, we ask you not to use that unless you're loading equipment, just because sometimes it can get stuck and not close all the way. You just let it close and walk away. Sometimes it doesn't latch, and then that means it's open. The wind can come and blow it open, and somebody has free reign of our lab, right? So it's very important. Don't use it unless you're actively using equipment, and then also just kind of check it after you leave. Make sure that it did latch properly. And as you're just walking by, going to from the lab, just double check and make sure, is that truly locked and closed? And if everybody's doing that, it will help keep things safe and in good condition. And be proactive about it. Don't assume somebody else's job is to take care of it. All right, now onto the fun stuff. So this is kind of the collection of the different equipment. And I don't think we got the new scanners and stuff on here actually from Micah. So there's other equipment in addition to this. But you can see we have a wide range of different equipment in terms of total stations, levels, and other things, multi-stations. We've got a mobile LiDAR truck as well. Hopefully somebody's interested in picking that up and starting to use it for some different applications. And then we've got structured light scanners, several different laser scanners, a yellow scan navigator with this bathymetric LiDAR UAS system, and different types of sonar systems. And so you'll see some of this equipment today, and Chase is going to talk about kind of the equipment checkout, because we do have some units that their main focus is for teaching, but can be used for research, and we have others that their main focus is for use in research. So we're well stocked. One thing that we wanted to also kind of address today is with Fieldwork. So we have a lot of different research groups that are very active in collecting field data, and it's one of the best experiences you can have is to go out in the field and collect data. Not only do you go to some pretty beautiful places, as you can see from the photographs. Where were you guys last summer, Chris?
We've been to the Florida Keys several times, U.S. Virgin Islands a few times, all over the place. Just recently up at the Clackamas River, Baird and Chestnut did some data collection with that new bathymetric LiDAR system. By the way, while I'm talking, that previous slide that Mike showed with all that equipment, that's really a great benefit that all of you have is access to that equipment for research. Students in other programs might not necessarily have that, so hopefully there will be opportunities for you not only to use it, but use it in your own research.
Yeah, and make sure any papers, publications, presentations, you acknowledge Leica for doing it, because it's pretty amazing they did that. All right, so we've got some really great field sites, other ones like Scorpion Desert that maybe aren't so great. No, just kidding, we don't we don't scan at those horrible places. But a lot of beautiful sites on the coast, different rockfall sites, and one of the things is the fieldwork takes a lot of extra people, and so that's something I think important. Just make sure that you make yourself available to participate in other field efforts, even if it's not directly your project, right? Because one, if you're helping somebody out, they'll be more likely to help you out, right? You're going to need help at certain times on your projects. Two, it's a great learning experience, and three, it's a great way to see some different places, learn some different workflows from other people. So we encourage you to be involved and engaged in it. But one thing to kind of always keep in mind is just keep your advisor in the loop, right? So if somebody in the lab says, hey, I'm going out to the snake pit to do some laser scanning. I don't know why I'm on it. Never mind. I had a friend visiting from New Zealand. We were talking about some of the creatures in Australia, so I think that's maybe why I'm on the creepy crawly thing. But anyways, if you're going out and helping somebody with a field effort, make sure your advisor knows, because if you're going to be doing an extended amount of help, we have to make sure that your time reflects that. Today, we'll talk through kind of setting up a scan plan. So this is just one scan plan from our Rumble Pit site. So Chase and Ezra are going to talk a little bit more about that process, but just thinking through what type of instruments you're going to use, where you're going to set up, where you're going to set up your targets, other things. Let's just give you kind of a preview of where we're headed today. And just, again, the acknowledgement to Leica and KR for that. So that's kind of the high level overview. So where we're going to go from here.
And new equipment that we get from Leica. And Leica doesn't donate all of that equipment to every Geomatics program. They're very selective in where they're willing to do this. We're not the only program they do this for, but we're the only program they do it at this scale. So, Barrett, can you hand me one of those GNSS receivers? So these things are brand new. The cases aren't, we buy those, but the equipment's brand new. I haven't even set this one up yet, other than putting a sticker on it. And so the reason why they're willing to give us all this equipment, I mean, it's $1.5 million worth of equipment that they give us on a 6-month rotational basis, is because they see how meticulous we are in caring for the equipment, which is a really great skill to have when you move out into industry, is being able to care and maintain for the specialized sensors that you're going to be using to collect all of your very important data. And so they like how meticulous we are in taking care of it, how well we maintain it, and so that's why they're willing to give us all this equipment on loan. And so we want to make sure that we reiterate that as we go through this process. That doesn't mean you should be scared of using it, right? Because we want to use it. That's why they gave it to us. But we also just want to care for it, right? And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the process of caring for this. We'll get to that in a little bit later of a section. But part of caring for it is having a good survey plan. So we have to have a good survey plan so we know how we're going to utilize the equipment, and then we can plan out our day. Because when you start having mistakes, for example, maybe equipment gets dropped or something out in the field, usually those happen because you're kind of frantic and panicking during the day of like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. You're feeling rushed, right? But if we have a really good survey plan identified, that doesn't happen, right? Or it happens a lot less. Accidents still happen always, but it happens a lot less. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, is our survey plans. And this is good. This is going to be interactive. We have a lot of current students in here who have gone out and collected some data, done some research, and we have some of you that are new, but maybe you have done that, or at least you'll have some input on things. So what I want to do is talk about some things that should be included in a survey plan. What do you think should be included in a survey plan? Anybody?
Equipment checklist.
Equipment checklist? Fantastic. How do we figure out our equipment checklist? How do you know what equipment you need? Yeah.
Just go over what type of data you're going to be collecting.
Great. What's the objective of our fieldwork? Right? What are we going to be doing? What data do we need to collect? Right? So we need to prepare our official, like, okay, what are we trying to answer? What data do we need to collect? And then we can start figuring out what equipment we need to take to address that issue. Right? So this gets into our survey plan, where we start saying, okay, well, I need an equipment checklist, but I don't know what equipment I need yet. So we're going to go through an activity here in a little bit for the fieldwork we're going to do this afternoon. And we're going to go through, and I'm going to ask you all to, because we're going to break up into our groups that you signed up for, that you got assigned to. And you're going to prepare what equipment you need for that. So when Ezra and I start going through what our field ops will be later this afternoon, keep in mind of like, okay, well, what equipment are we going to need to do this task? And you want to get into the very fine details. You don't want to just say, oh, well, I need 5 GNSS units. Okay, that's cool, but do you need anything else for those? Do you need a bipod? Do you need a rover rod? Do you need a 2-meter fixed height tripod? Do you need a tape to measure the height of it? right? Everything that goes into supporting the main piece of equipment also needs to be listed, right? And so we'll go through and talk about how to create the checklist. Great. All right, very important one. When you create a checklist, you want to check it at least 3 times, right? So when we finally have our equipment checklist, we'll check out the equipment. I'll talk about what that process looks like in a second. You'll check out that equipment. Maybe you're getting some of the equipment from over here, from our educational survey lab. Maybe some of it's going to be from the grad lab where it's all more research focused equipment. Either way, you're going to compile everything and you're going to stage it in an area. Then you're going to go through your checklist and you're going to say, okay, do I have everything I need staged? Perfect. Stage that. Maybe the next day or 2 days later, you're ready to go out for your field ops and you're getting ready to load it into your car. You're going to check it one more time as you're loading it into the car. Right? Now make sure that you have everything you need. Sometimes our field ops, like Chris mentioned, maybe you were going to the U.S. Virgin Islands, right? You might have to ship some things. So instead of loading into the car, check your list as you're loading into your box that you're going to ship. Sometimes you're doing things and you're making an 8-hour drive down at the south coast. We forgot a bipod, right? That really sucks. So we're going to checklist everything. Make sure we stage everything out. Make sure you have all your batteries. Nothing's worse than, not they're charged. Right. Okay, good. That's a great big one. All right, what other things do you need to think about in your survey planning?
Site safety, if you need extra vests, hard hats, cones.
Great, site safety. So let's say your field op plan should include a safety plan portion to it, right? As we're going to talk more about safety planning later, so I'm not going to dive into this one, but you should have a safety plan. What's required? Do you need signage, right? Are you going to be working near roadways, so we need to have signs? Do we need traffic cones? If you're using the UAS, do you need cones or signs to create a safe space for you to land and take off from, right? All these things factor into it, but we need to know what data we're collecting and then make sure we have the appropriate safety gear and equipment to support that operation. Good. Great one, Susan. All right, what else? What's that?
Personnel, how many people do you need for the survey?
Ooh, good one. Personnel. Personnel/assigned duties. This is where you guys all realize I'm a terrible speller. Alright. This is very important because we need to make sure we have the personnel we need to support the mission. Right? Say for example you need to do a UAS survey. Well, which UAS platform are you going to fly? And is somebody on your data collection team qualified and experienced to fly that airframe? Right? Some things I have to consider there is, do they have their Part 107 certification? Highly recommend everybody in the room gets their Part 107. If you have questions and you want to go through that process and want some recommendations for study material, just ask any of us. There's a lot of people in the lab already that have their Part 107. You can talk to myself, Chris. We can give you some recommendations on how to prepare for that. Highly recommend everyone does that. It's a cool cert to get and it's not a ton of work to get. Okay. Alright, so we need to make sure we have the people to do the survey we need, and then we should assign them duties. So, for example, when we go through in this last field op that we did with Barry, Chris, myself, we prepared our survey plan. And we had a couple different things that we had to do. We had to collect UAS imagery, so like using just traditional photogrammetry, just an RGB camera. We were doing UAS LiDAR collection. We were collecting some video, so a bunch of UAS data collection, but then we also had to collect a bunch of reference data sets. And we had to establish a control network and collect checkpoints. We're going to talk more about that a little bit as well. But we had to collect all of this data, and so what we did is we assigned each of us different roles. And we said, okay, Chase, you're going to be in charge of the control survey and how we set that up and manage that. Baird, you're going to be in charge of collecting the aerial imagery and planning those missions, right? That person's the lead. That doesn't mean they have to do everything for that, but they're leading it, making sure that they've created their checklist. They know what they need for that, right? They've made sure, created a list of what data they need to collect. So when they're out in the field and they're collecting that data, we know that we've got everything that we need, right? So assign leads to doing different tasks. That'll help distribute the workload a little bit more, and then you have different parties that are responsible for different things, which is really good. Okay. Obviously, Mike, Chris, Ezra, if there's anything else you want to chime in with for things, go for it.
I can add things, but are you gonna go through more?
Yeah, we'll keep going through stuff,
Okay.
but you can keep adding stuff.
So just like what you need personally, so water, sunscreen, headgear, often important for a lot of our work. We're working on the water, so just things like, water shoes, just plan for the weather and the whole range of weather that you might encounter. This kind of goes under equipment, but one of the things that I've seen for fieldwork is sometimes people forget to take photos or take enough photos, and those end up becoming so valuable. You're always thinking that the LiDAR data or the total station data or whatever you're collecting, like that's the most important to that. It is, but in terms of what you actually use and creating figures for your thesis and your thesis or dissertation defense and conference presentations and posters, like having those photos that you took in the field is super important. And it also really, another thing that people sometimes forget is it's really good to get photos that have people in them, like people doing things. Those tend to kind of just be more exciting photos that work better for presentations and stuff like that than just your photo of the tripod with the total station or whatever. A rule of thumb that I give my students is think about what number of photos you think you need and multiply that by 3, and that should be the target for collecting.
So talking more about photos, I like to, so if I know I'm going to be like, okay, I'm collecting this data for my thesis, I need to have a figure that is showing this, this, and this. I make a photo list. So you can create that in your data collection checklist, right? And say, okay, I need a photo of me having my total station set up over the point, collecting my checkpoints because I'm going to talk about that in my thesis. Great. Put that in your checklist. Take 3 times as many photos as you think you need of that thing, right? That way you get it, make sure you get a good one. I had another thing I want to say about photos. Oh, we're going to practice this later today. When we go through and we break out into our subgroups to go collect different types of data this afternoon, what y'all are going to do is you're going to be assigned the duty of conveying what you did for this afternoon session to everyone else, so that everyone can see, oh, this is what the control surveying team did, and this is how they collected that data. This is the data they ended up collecting. So we're gonna make summaries of data we collected, and we're going to create a presentation that conveys that work. So we can practice disseminating this information later, right? So it's a pretty important skill to be able to not just collect the data, but be able to convey what you did to collect that data. And that's, I think, a part that gets lost often. So we're gonna practice that. Yeah.
Alright, won't beat the photos as a dead horse, but I will. The other, every instrument setup you do, what adapters you have on top of it, get close-up figures so it's very clear that, hey, I used the 4 centimeter offset or the 10 centimeter. Because that stuff can be really hard to track down, especially the kind of small deviations. And sometimes in the field you realize, hey, I didn't have this piece or this adapter, and you have to sometimes come up with some creative solutions. Make sure that gets documented and recorded really well so you have that on hand. So in addition to kind of just the overview photographs, get close-ups of the instrument. It'll just really save you a lot of time in the processing. Another thing I'd throw out there is permits as well. So there are certain sites where you're required to get a permit. So in Oregon, collecting any field research on the coastal area, for example, you have to have a permit to go out and collect data. And they have to go through and review it with some sensitive habitats. There may be some times of year that you can't do it. Working in the state highways, there's a process sometimes that you have to go through with that as well. So talk to your advisor to make sure that all that stuff is covered. Or if you're flying UAS, there's permits or procedures you have to follow with that as well to register the aircraft and copies of information for them.
Yeah. Even one more thing, Chase, were you gonna, so that very first item, that's equipment checklist, And Heather had a great answer in suggesting that as the first thing to think through, but there's a lot that goes into determining what type of equipment you need. Are you gonna cover that as work?
Yeah, let's talk about it right now.
The way I do that is, I think about the study that I'm doing, you know, what are the research objectives, what answers am I trying to get to, and then kind of work backwards towards what I need. And we've got a lot of equipment that can collect some of the same types of data, but at vastly different precisions, accuracies, spatial resolutions. So for example, if I know that I need elevation data, I can collect elevation data with an uncrewed aircraft system, a UAS. I can collect elevation data with the total station, with GNSS, with differential leveling. We've got all these different tools. But what makes sense for the project? And then a lot of times, Chase mentioned this, I think a little better. I heard him use the term control points and checkpoints. Those are two separate things. So a lot of times in geomatics, what we're doing is we're trying to develop some new method, maybe a new algorithm processing workflow, whatever, for generating spatial data. And then a lot of times what we want to do with that is we want to be able to say, how well did we do? So what's its final accuracy? And how efficient was it? And other things. But to get to that question of, okay, how accurate, how good was the data that we collected? A lot of times we need an independent check data set. And that's different than control. Control is typically what we use internally inside that project for accurate georeferencing. The independent checkpoints are, a lot of times that's surveyed using a different technology, maybe one that's more accurate than what we're trying to develop or test. And so starting with what are the goals, and your advisor and other grad students can also help you think through this, but that's where I start, is what am I trying to do, and then I work backwards towards that equipment checklist, which was the first thing that Heather suggested.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Ezra.
Should we know the date and time to go out to do the survey?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah.
You don't have to worry about weather here.
Yeah, and
Tides.
you don't make up the plan to go out to do a survey the same day in the afternoon, right? But today we're gonna do that.
Yeah. That's a big one.
And transportation maybe.
Ooh.
Yeah. Logistics.
Lodging. Transportation. Got it.
Also the equipment settings. I mean,
Ooh,
like,
yes, this
we
is
have to think
what I
about,
wanted
like-
to get into next too. This
Yeah.
is great.
so
We're right there, man. Okay. Settings plus workflows. Okay. So I'm gonna go on a little tangent here, but it's all about settings and workflows for the equipment that we have. So if you want to take one of these and just pass it around, I'll make these available to you later too. But a lot of the equipment, it's stored over here in OM110. So this is OM110. This is the undergraduate equipment room. I'll take y'all back there to look at that in just a second. This equipment is used and provided to us predominantly for education, not just research. Now the equipment over here can be used for research, but its primary objective is to be used for education purposes. Whereas all the equipment that's over in the grad lab, that's for research. And we can use it for education, right? So we can use it in our classes, but its primary purpose is for research. So all of this equipment that's stored over here, primarily used for education reasons in our classes, they're all configured to be used in our classes. So what we do is we create these different working styles. Or is everyone in here familiar with kind of how Leica runs their equipment with things? Okay. So what Leica does is they create these things called working styles. Essentially, it's all of the configured settings for whatever you're trying to do, right? And we can modify and change these working styles to have all sorts of different features, right? So you can have one that's set to log raw GNSS data. You can have that setting turned off. You could have it set to automatically store points after a certain time interval. You could have all these different settings and configurations. And what we do is I create a handful that are the most common settings that we use when we're using these GNSS units. And those are what you see in front of you. Those are what all of our GNSS are configured to use. What you are not allowed to do is go into a working style and start changing the settings on it. I have like locks set on these, like admin access things to it, but some of you will be TAs and you're going to get access to what that password is to turn those off. Please do not change the settings. We have 160 students coming through this lab per week. And when the equipment settings get changed, now they don't collect the data that they're supposed to for that lab, and it becomes very chaotic for us to correct that issue. So please do not change the settings. Similarly, if you start going through those menu systems, you might just be bouncing around in there and accidentally uncheck a box. And now you're not logging the raw data for your research project. So, this is a summary. The sheet that I just gave you is a summary of all of the GNSS working styles we have. If you need something more specific to your research project, when you submit your equipment checkout form that you'll send to me and say, hey, I need this equipment. If none of those working styles work for you, say, hey, I also need a new working style. Maybe it's based off of the real-time working style, but I need it to stop logging after 5 minutes. I want to stop and automatically store that. Perfect. I will create you a temporary working style for your project, and I'll even show you how to do that so you're familiar with it, but we're not going to modify an existing working style because all of our instructions for classes say select the real-time working style, and it's configured to do this. When we change that, it causes problems. So what we'll do is we'll create whatever working styles, or we'll even just pick one of the existing ones if they work for you. And then what I highly recommend doing is go out and collect some test data before your field work. So if you're not 100% confident in how to use this equipment and that it's configured and working correctly, before you travel to your site, go collect some test data. So check out the equipment, go out into the survey field over there, the big grass fields, and collect some data that's representative of what you'll be doing out in the field. You want to be very confident in the workflows you're going to be implementing in the field before you go to the field. So check the settings, process some test data, make sure that your offsets, antenna offsets, lever arm offsets are all appropriate and working as expected, right? That way you don't go out and spend 2 days collecting data, get back to the office, process it and be like, oh, this is weird, there's a 5 centimeter bias and I don't know what it's from, right? Let's catch that beforehand before we go spend 2 full days collecting 200 scans, right? Because now it's a really hard problem to fix. Okay. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Well, I guess one question is, so I am out in the field and I notice it's not logging raw data because somebody did mess up the working style. What do I do, Chase? What do I do?
What we could have done is we could have avoided this by checking things before we went out into the field.
Hey,
And then
Let's
Chase
say I
is
checked it, I did my due diligence, but then Chris came in and said, you know what, I'm gonna cause trouble for mine.
That's true, you could do that.
Sometimes it happens.
We're gonna try to avoid this because when we stage our equipment after you've tested it, you're gonna put it in a spot over in Koval Lab and say, do not use. Nobody else is allowed to touch it because you've checked it out officially for your project for that given time range, and now nobody else can go grab that and use it. Right, so you're gonna set that aside. Now if something does happen, it changes, right? And you're just like, I don't think it's working correctly. When I check out the equipment, I'll give you my cell number and you can call me and say like, hey, it's not working. What do I do? And then I can usually talk you through how to unlock things and check all the settings and make sure it's working. There's also certain times, for example, if you're using the real-time GNSS working style, which is leveraging the Oregon real-time GNSS network, sometimes the ORGN goes down, right? And I'm kind of the manager of this equipment through ODOT, and so when the equipment the ORGN goes down, they send me a text and an email and sometimes a phone call and be like, hey, it's not working today, this station's down. And so if you just reach out to me and say like, hey, it's not working for some reason, do you know if there's any outages with the ORGN or anything? And then we can work through that. And sometimes I can work with the ORGN managers and they can try to check things on their end to address that. But yeah, you can call me and I'm happy to help. But we're gonna try and prevent that by having done our due diligence and checking everything before we go to the field.
It's funny that that was Chase's answer, because my answer to Mike's question was gonna be call Chase. I've lost track of the number of times that I've done that. Chase,
Yeah.
this work.
And then it works most of the time.
Yeah, most of that.
Okay. But I would prefer that you all do that check before you go, because then what I can do is use it as a learning opportunity, not let's put out this fire, right? I can say, okay, well, like this is how we can check this, like, and this is how we update the settings, right? I can use that to inform you how to do this, as opposed to just like talking you through it and trying to ease your anxiety, right?
And it's good there that if you build in your plan some redundancy, right? Because, you know, a lot of times you may be using the ORGN. Well, it sometimes goes down, and most of the time it's up and running. It's not usually a big issue in that, but the bigger issue is you may not get cell service where you're at, or the cell service is spotty.
Yep.
And so if you're relying solely on the RTK data from the ORGN, you may be in trouble, right? But the units are set up, they'll log the static data at the same time, right? So make sure you have that as kind of a backup.
Yeah, that's why I don't want people going there and accidentally uncheck that box.
Yeah.
So we've had that in the last year, that's happened a few times. And it completely like, that data is useless because the origin went down and we weren't logging the raw data. So now our coordinate quality is plus or minus 3 to 4 meters. And that's useless for the level of accuracy and precision that was needed for those projects. So you just want to be cognizant of those things. I'm not saying any of this to scare anybody, it's just like, this is the protocol we should be following. And so if you are working on a research project and your PI says, hey, I want you to put together a fieldwork plan and I want you to check out the equipment and get it all prepared, let's go through these steps. I'm not expecting you to memorize all this, right? Talk to your supervisor who's leading that project and they'll help you work through this and create these lists. And then when you go to check out the equipment, I'll ask these questions and say like, hey, have you gone through, like, do you know what working styles you need? Do you need all these things? And if you don't know the answers to that, I'll probably send you back to your supervisor for that research project and say, okay, we'll figure out what accuracy requirements you need in those things. And then we'll work through it together. The goal when you graduate with your degree is that you can do all of these things. This is a really good skill to have to be able to plan your projects and be able to execute that plan. And so this is kind of a soft skill that we're going to be working on while you're here, right? So use it as a learning opportunity. Yeah.
So maybe something you talk about later when we're actually doing it, but like knowing like when your receiver or controller or whatever is like not collecting it. Like I know sometimes there's like a weird like if you have the sound up, you can hear like a weird sound. It's like,
like a little plane
I'm not
something,
getting data, but like sometimes you can't hear that, whether you're not like it's the winds or whatever. So how do you, I don't know if we talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. And usually, whenever I check out, because I check out equipment to a lot of different groups and things, and so I'll do like a quick training. And so usually that's why I'm like, hey, okay, if you have time, I highly recommend we go test this right now if you're not familiar with using this and knowing when it's logging or it's not. And so when it's time to check that out, if you're like, hey, can you give me a reminder on what this looks like when it's working correctly? And then I'll just talk you through and be like, okay, these are the things you want to check and look for. I could talk about it right now, but like we don't see it yet. So we'll talk about it when we break out and collect data this afternoon. Yeah. And then, because not everyone's going to be in, for example, the control surveying subgroup, those people document how that works, and they'll create a presentation that they'll share tomorrow morning, right? Okay. Yeah.
I think one thing just want to know, so the field work or for a research project or for whatever project shouldn't be the first time you use that equipment. So you should be more familiar with the equipment and how it works, like how it looks like when it behaves, when it performs. Then that will be the requirement, right? Like you shouldn't be your first time touching the equipment when you're in the field, right? So that will create all sorts of issues.
Yeah, but those are great questions to ask before you get out into the field, right? So as you're putting this plan together, that's something that you can put in your fieldwork plan. It's like, okay, when you're collecting data, make sure and check these things. Like here's your data collection checks while you're collecting it. Yeah.
Have that redundancy built in, right? If you're doing GPS, you also have a total station hitting some of the control points.
Yeah. Yep. Good. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I met this within the conversation, but I think the coordinate system to define which coordinate system within all, and make sure that it's consistent with all the equipment you're using.
That's a huge one. All of our GNSS units, I load in all of the different ORGN, or sorry, not ORGN, OCRS, our low distortion projections in Oregon. But sometimes you're going to a different region, maybe the US Virgin Islands, and you need a different map projection in there. In your checkout form, you're gonna tell me what coordinate system you need. And if it's not in there, I'm gonna say, okay, cool, let's meet up and I'll show you how you can load this in, right? But with coordinate system, you obviously have your map projection, but then we also need to talk about maybe what geoid model we're going to use. What is your vertical datum going to be? Horizontal datum. We need to have all of that information so that we can ensure we have things configured correctly. For logging the raw data, the cool thing is we can post-process things and adjust that as necessary. If you're only collecting the real-time data, it's a little bit trickier to go through and modify all of that. But yeah, that's a really good one. Thanks, Mina. How do we know which coordinate system we need to use for our project? Where do you find that out at? Do you just pick a random one? You like have a Jeffrey spinning wheel and you're just like all these coordinate systems and you do that and it lands on one and you're just like, looks like we're using UTM zone 16 north. Yeah.
Consider how large your site is and if
Okay.
it has been surveyed before.
Yeah.
and
Are we?
see
Yeah,
the
we're
number
tying
of
into
kind of
existing
insertion.
surveys, what coordinate systems and datums was all their data reference to. What other things?
So how large your site is, like if
Yeah.
it's a smaller site, doesn't need to maybe be as accurate, but if you're scanning very large and want lower distortion, then you might need something more custom.
Yeah. Good. Now we can use a bunch of predefined systems. You mentioned, well, we could pick something custom, right? So maybe we can use one of the low distortion projections that minimize that ground versus grid distortion. That's what the low distortion means. It's ground is essentially equivalent to the grid distances. If you don't know what that means, you're going to talk about it in your classes a lot. But sometimes there's not a low distortion projection in your area. And you're like, well, I don't want to use this UTM zone because the distortion's 1 in 10,000, it's way too large, I don't want to do that. Well, we can create a custom projection. I don't like to do this a lot. Ideally, we can find a low distortion one that already exists and is defined in software. But if you need to create one, you can, right? Or you can find one that will work and suit your needs. Sometimes it's just based off of who are you delivering this data to? Are you delivering it to, maybe it's a mapping firm or maybe it's like Parks and Recs or somebody and they're like, hey, we need it in this because all of our other data is in this. So sometimes they'll define it to you, right? But you wanna make sure what is the downstream of your data going to be, who's going to be leveraging it, and what does it need to be in for that? Yeah.
So let's say I need to work in feet because I like to make things difficult, right? What do? Do I start out in feet at the beginning and choose that coordinate system? Do I wait till the end? What would you recommend?
I have my opinion.
All
I
right.
think if you talk to
Let's
some
see if your
people,
opinion matches mine.
so if you talk to some people in the industry, they'll say, oh, I always work in Oregon and be international feet. Remember, there's two different types of feet. You have the US Survey foot, the international foot. Even though the US Survey foot's been deprecated, people still use it all the time. So maybe whoever's going to be collecting the data is like, I always work in this unit. And that's gonna vary based off of their opinion of what they like to do. I think I can say this, for research applications, my opinion has always been collect all of your data in metric, because honestly that's how our equipment works already by default. It's always measuring things in meters, and then it's usually converting it to whatever other unit you want it to be in. So I always start with just like, okay, well, what does it default to, which is the metric system. So I would talk to your advisor.
I'd say all advisors, could I speak for everybody, work in meters,
Yeah.
do that as a step at the end. So we had a project we did for state parks that they required the data in feet, and so we kind of switched some of this stuff at the start, and when somebody put the height in, they measured in meters like we normally do, but put that value in as if it was feet, right? And so there was this offset, and we're sitting there trying to compare it with some of the check data we had, and it took us forever to figure out, oh, that was what the issue is. So across the board, work in meters in all our research projects and products and so on, and then if any feet is needed, that's this last
Do it at
step.
the very end.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do is do a bunch of like, oh, I'm going to work in feet, and then I'm going to convert it to meters, and then I'm going to work in meters for a while, and I'm going to convert it back to feet. Because every time you do that, you do incorporate a little bit of error, just due to rounding bias in the software of how it applies those unit conversions.
And if it uses the right factor.
And if it uses the right factor. And so just pick one unit, work in it till the end, get to your final product, and then you can convert. Yeah.
If you could, just don't use fit at all, because, all right, so we're talking about GPS, GNSS, right? Well, what do we mount it on? It's gonna be a 2 meter fixed height. It's like a rod pole or it's a tripod, right? All right, what's the 2 meters in foot?
6.562 feet.
All right, how many significant figures do you need when you input that offset when you log the data? All right, so there are all sorts of things that can go wrong, and the equipment is running meters metric internally, so let's align with that. We can always do all the other, conversions later. So there's a difference between the data collection and the data delivery. So the data delivery, sometimes people ask for weird coordinate system or units, so we can accommodate, but for the data collection, for sake of the data security, right? So we always use meters.
Yeah. And you'll find in all of our classes, all the grad courses you'll be taking, we all just default using metric. It makes our life a lot easier for a lot of those reasons that Ezra and Mike just mentioned. And so that's what we'll be doing, and we'll just roll that into research too.
Yeah.
That's how I set up all our working styles. All our GNSS set to work in meters. All of our total stations, at least the working styles that I would recommend we select for things. The only ones that aren't set to meters are the ones we use in our undergraduate survey lab. But the one I use in control surveying is in meters. You'll even find in practice, so even at ODOT, when they're doing their control surveys, they default work in meters and then they convert at the end. Now when they're doing like cadastral, like property surveys, they work in feet the whole time, but when they're trying to be very precise, they're usually working in the metric system and then converting afterwards.
Yeah. So that, just as Chase mentioned, there are other working styles in our undergraduate classes. Those are working in feet, right? So when you check out the total station, make sure you're in the right working style.
Yeah.
Because if you see it pop up with feet in the units, then you're not in the right working style. So so switch that. And then the prism pulls, those are in feet. So
Yeah.
make sure you convert them, and that's something I think we'll add to an equipment manual. Is there are certain stops on it, and there are some stops that are very specific to a GPS mounted on top, or you've got a prism under the GPS. And so there's little diagrams on the back. Pay attention to, because if you lock it into those have different offsets to actually what the prism is. So you only want to use those if you're doing like prism and GPS, if you see that in the icon. But we'll put together a sheet that shows what those different increments are in feet, and then what that conversion factor is in meters. And so you just put that in your field plan. We're always going to use the antenna or the rod height at 6.6 feet, which is 2.01168. Don't ask me how I know that. Meters. So you just kind of have that set up at the front.
Flight attendants on a plane. Okay, I do want to talk about a lot of the things that we just discussed a little bit. I want to enforce it a little bit more. So that was a really good question you asked, of like, how do we measure these heights and where do we measure to? And it depends on manufacturers. A lot of Leicas is always going to be to the antenna reference point. Trimble can sometimes vary, and they'll have like antenna measuring points that you go to with their, and you measure with their special tapes and stuff. We're always measuring arc heights, antenna reference point. Antenna reference points are generally going to be the lowest point of that antenna. And so if we look at this, the lowest point is this little silver ring that's down at the bottom, right? That is our antenna reference point. when you use a 2 meter fixed height tripod, which again it's like air quotes on 2 meter fixed height, right? Because it's not exactly 2 meters. It's saying it's 2 meters to the antenna reference point. And so when we screw these on there, which the way I do this, by the way, is I don't like teeter this and use 2 hands to turn the antenna. Just turn the pole, hold the antenna with 1 hand so you don't risk dropping it, right? When that's threaded on all the way, it's basically taking the very top of this 2 meter pole and putting it right up to the arc height. Now there is a lot of room for error in this because this thing could get a little loose, right? Same thing with this part. So when we were saying like, is it exactly 2 meters? Well, it might be when you have a brand new tip on here. And you'll see this one's actually not going to be able to unscrew because I haven't loosened it in a while. But these little silver tips at the end are replaceable because they get wore down. And so if you go and you're working on a survey crew and they've been using that same tip for a while, it could easily be 5 millimeters to a centimeter short. I've seen some surveyors that like this whole point, it's not pointed anymore, it's just like a nub. And I was like, do you still call that 2 meters? And it's like, yeah. I was like, it's not. The other big issue that can happen, and I always recommend checking this, is just in surveying throughout the day, these can get a little loose. Especially if you're like in soil and you're stabbing this in the ground, and when you go to like twist it to pull it out of the soil, you can loosen this. And as this unthreads, that pole is getting a little bit longer and longer and longer. So I always recommend is like whenever you're going to put this on your point or whatever, just like give that a little twist periodically. Make sure it's still tight, right? Because what can happen is this causes like a random bias in your data, right? And you'll see it, but you won't be able to be like, oh, it's consistent everywhere. But you'll be like, some of these are like, the error is getting larger, right? And so just always check that, because that's one that's really hard to catch later on and correct for, because it's variable. Okay, the other thing to talk about, well, I guess we'll still talk about this, is when you check out your equipment, you want to make sure that it's calibrated correctly. Don't just assume it is, because again, we use all this equipment in our undergrad labs. This equipment can get dropped, right? We teach very well how to maintain the equipment, but things happen. Maybe the student, as they're bringing it back in, they accidentally barely tapped it on the door, right? That can still be enough to knock this bubble out of calibration, right? And so we have some checks back here that you can use, some little jigs that you can check to make sure it's calibrated. Whenever you check out the equipment, I'll usually recommend, like I'll always check it myself, but I always recommend you check it so you're confident that it's working. Now, that being said, once you leave here and you check it out, don't just throw it in the bed of the truck when you're loading it. This is a calibrated piece of equipment, right? So you don't just, you can gently set it in the bed of your truck and you're like, oh, I'm being very careful with it. And then you grab a big box and you just throw it in the bed of the truck on top of it. I'm saying this because I've seen that happen. I've seen it especially happen with these where people are like, oh yeah, I can just set stuff on this, and then they get bent. And now it's no longer a straight rod, it's all cantilevered. We just replaced all these because so many of them were bent. And one of the reasons they get bent is someone will set stuff on top of it, maybe it's some soft shell things, and then they'll start trying to pull it out of the car, and they'll be like, oh, let me just pick up on this a little bit and try to get it out. And it bends, and then now it's not a very calibrated system. Right, but you always want to check those bubble valves, make sure that they're calibrated. If you ever check one out and you're just like, hey, it's not calibrated, let me know and I'll show you how to calibrate it. That'll be a really fun learning opportunity. Okay. Other things? Yeah.
Just when you're talking about putting it in the soil, for instance,
Yeah.
do you, because it's got like a sharp tip, do you just set that like directly on
Ooh, good
top
catch.
without it?
Usually I'll use a topo shoe. I'm gonna grab one and show you what it looks like.
If you're working in like mushy soil, we have a topo shoe that spreads out, so we'll show it in just a minute. But that's one thing you want to be very careful of is if you're trying to, collect maybe validation points to make sure your ground filtering is working. If you're stabbing that in the ground and it's going down a few centimeters, you're control data is gonna be off, so that helps make it a lot smoother
Yeah.
for those applications.
Yeah, I think really what I was saying is like you could just be walking from point to point and like stabbing it in the ground, right? Just kind of using it as a stick.
Yes.
You aren't been doing that,
Yeah.
but you can do that, right?
You should not do that. Some people do.
There's some other reasons why you shouldn't do that, because every time you set it down, when you do that, it's kind of shocking the system, right? And that can cause things to go out of calibration. With these ones, this is your prism pole. It has snaps. The reason it has snaps is once you put the prism on top of this, even if you're really careful and you're just setting it down, that's a big mass, and it can cause it to, if it's not, and it'll snap and cause it to like lower down a little bit. So always use a snap. This is a good conceptual question. I'm doing a total station survey. So maybe Muge's my total station. She's sighting and measuring to me. Is it better for me to have the prism low, like this? Or is it better to have it extended all the way up like this? What would you choose and why? You're gonna choose high?
Yeah, before we make every visualization.
Good. I like that. Sometimes you need it to be higher because maybe there's like a shrub up in front of you. You need to be able to get above it, right? Does anyone else have any thoughts? Yeah.
It's like windy, maybe you want to lower.
Okay. So it could be windy. Yeah, because we don't want it teetering around. Well, what if it's teetering here versus teetering here? Which one's gonna have a bigger error? The low one, right? So usually by default I say try to keep the prism rod as low as you can, right? Obviously the only exception to that is like, well, I need it to maintain line of sight to my total station. Try to think about this though before you start your survey, because it's a lot easier if you just have a single height throughout the day. So look around the site and say, am I gonna need a high rod? If I do, maybe you're like, okay, well let me choose whatever that high rod needs to be and I'll leave it there the whole time, right? Or if you're like, there's only gonna be one side I need it, okay, cool. Leave it low, take really good field notes. Say, hey, on checkpoint 105, I had to raise it from 5 feet up to 6 feet. Right, I say feet because, as we talked about, these rods are only in feet for the snaps. Okay, does that make sense? All right.
Yeah, and I would, if you're gonna do a low and a high, have a fair amount of separation between
Yeah.
the two. Don't pick ones that are like
Yeah.
right next to each other.
Yeah. Don't
Because
just
then
do
it's really hard to distinguish.
Yeah.
Otherwise, then it becomes clear that, okay, this
Yeah.
was a much higher point.
Yep.
You know, or like when your target blows over or something and you just have it in a random spot, don't try to re-put it back in the same spot unless you have an actual
Yeah.
physical mark and you reset up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you know, a few centimeters gets really hard in an adjustment to pick out.
Yeah.
Was that an issue or was it not?
Okay, so I want to take a step back, a really higher overview. We're talking about all these little things that we can do to help us ensure that we collect the data we need. But really what we're saying is we need to be meticulous, because a small decision in the field is just being like, oh, I can't see the rod, let me raise it up a notch. Well, like that can have big ramifications when you go to process that data later. And you might not remember that you went up 1 notch, and maybe you didn't take good notes, and you didn't correct it when you were adjusting your data. Now you're stuck figuring out like, well, why was this control point off? Like, why is that 1 point 0.2 of a foot lower than all the others, right? Like, I don't know what happened. Now you're gonna spend 2 or 3 weeks trying to figure this out, right? So we wanna be very meticulous in how we're collecting our data, and we wanna collect very good field notes, because it's gonna end up helping us later, right? But it starts off with really good field planning, thinking through all those items. I'm still working on a template that basically has all these things in it, like an outline of how you can create your survey plans. I was hoping to have it done to share with you today, but I didn't have it done, at least not to where I want to share it. And so I'm going to work on that, and then I'll send it out to you so you can start with something, and we'll include an example of a survey plan that you can use as kind of a guide as you're preparing yours. But really, I would talk to whoever your project supervisor is as you prepare that plan the first time. They'll help you think through some of the issues that have arose in the past to make sure you're addressing those in this plan. And every plan is going to be, or every project is a little unique. Some require permits, some require very specific permits, right? And so even any template or guide I give you isn't going to address everything you need. It's just going to be a good starting place.
we've got some examples, and two, we've got wealth of knowledge of everybody in the lab here, right? So bounce it around with a few people.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I'd say the one thing to remember is the plan is like your ideal of what happens, right? And sometimes things change in the field. And so if your plan is sloppy, your field work's gonna be even sloppier beyond that.
Yeah.
Chase, so I was wondering if those adapters or the topo shoe have the values stamped on them or something for the height offset.
That's such a good question. Alright, so survey equipment manufacturers are really smart. I like the way they do some things. I don't remember what the offset height is myself, but what's really cool is they standardize it. And so all of these are supposed to use the same height. What I usually recommend is take out a tape and check the height yourself after you put the shoe on and make sure it's still the same, right? But all of these are the same height, at least when they're new. This one slowly wore it down a little bit, but it's still actually pretty close. It's probably within like 2 millimeters of it. So all of these shoes are the same offset, so that whenever you put one back on, it still should be approximately 2 meters. That being said, check things, right? If you grab one, throw it on there, get a tape out, measure it, and see if it is 2 meters, right?
Yeah, you know, just add to it when you return the gear, return it in its default state. So in this case, that's with the tip. If you're using the topo shoe, don't return it and just leave it on. Make sure you return it, because the next person, hopefully they're checking, but sometimes that doesn't always happen, right?
Yeah.
So if you're helping other people out, they're helping you out, and we're a lot more consistent. We run into less of those issues.
Good. That answer your question, right? Yeah, I don't remember what this height is. It's a standard height though.
Do we have like a digital caliper that we can?
Yeah, they're like in the lab. Yeah.
Yeah, so part of today, we'll be doing some checks on the
Yeah, because this.
Back and measure with the body of caliper.
Yeah.
I forget the exact, but I it's safety, but.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions about things? What are y'all thinking about? What are we thinking here? Is this useful? It's a lot right now, right? Because you're just like, I'm not ready to start survey planning things. But hopefully now, whenever you are ready to, maybe in 3 months, 6 months, 2 weeks, whatever it ends up being, you kind of have a rough outline of like, okay, these are the things that I need to be thinking about. You can start thinking about that. Ezra, your hands was up. Did you have?
Oh, I want to say, you know, like when you change, especially when you change settings, configuration on the equipment, take photos, take field notes, and photos count as field notes. I know it's sometimes just not feasible to kind of take field notes in real time, but taking photos is a great way to do that because you have a timestamp and you have the context, and then you don't have to explain what happens. You know, sometimes you just can explain itself. So take a lot of photos, you know, for both presentations and also troubleshooting, and also record and archive your work in the field. Very important, and certain things can be done before or after the field work. For example, you know, what type of configuration. For example, if you decide to use the topo shoe for the entire survey, then that's something you can do before heading out. So all of those, and also, for example, the prism height. If you adjust that, you know, sometimes it's easier just to take a photo at a snap point, and you have the timestamp. You can match that with your measurements and so on. So that doesn't, you know, that doesn't mean you don't, you know, pay attention to all that. Just take a bunch of random photos, but just again, redundancy. You're gonna benefit from that, and you're not gonna regret taking extra notes and photos. So.
Yeah.
Do we use our personal phones like for the photos, or do you like?
Oh,
right
good
on
question.
cameras, or-
We have field cameras that you can take out. They're like waterproof, dustproof cameras. I think we have 3 or 4 of them. But I actually always have my phone, so I'm always just using my phone anyways. We're gonna talk about data structures later today. Maybe that's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow, yeah, so we'll go over a spot, so every project folder has a site folder photo folder, and so after a field effort, everybody goes and uploads their photos there before you forget.
Yeah. So you can use your phone if you're comfortable with that, or if you're just like, I don't want to use my phone. This is like in an area where it could get like really dirty or like broken. I just want a camera. Then we'll just check out a camera. Yep, that's something that you'll put in your equipment list. And then when you say, hey, I need these things, we'll make sure that you get all that to stage. Yeah.